Good morning. I'm going to start a series on Jesus' parables this morning. And it's a beautiful day in the neighborhood, a beautiful day in the neighborhood. Would you be mine? Would you be mine? Won't you be my neighbor? Who was that? Mr. Rogers, yeah. I know I shortened it up, but that was a long-running show on PBS that featured an older gentleman that would walk into the studio and take off his keratin sweater and change into his sneakers, and he would be singing that song while he was changing into his garb there. But today's parable, if you didn't catch it, it's going to be on the Good Samaritan, because that's what the lawyer questioned Jesus about. I'm going to give you some TV couples or individuals, and I want you to see if you know who their neighbor was. Dennis the Menace, Mr. Wilson, and he always used to say, "Hello, Mr. Wilson." Jerry Seinfeld. Kramer. The Flintstones. Barney, the Rubbles. Tim the Toolman Taylor. Wilson. Yeah, I was his sidekick. Have you ever asked yourself that question? Who is your neighbor? Who is my neighbor? The story of the Good Samaritan is a kind of a feel-good story other than the way it begins. Let's put it that way. It's a story of a good man helping someone along the road. It's a story of kindness and mercy. And we'd all like to think we'd behave just like the Samaritan did. We'll look at this wonderful Bible story today, and I was talking to Charles yesterday at that seminar I went to, and I was telling him, I said, you know, the Bible is filled with everything that happens in life. You don't even need to watch a soap opera. All you have to do is read the Old Testament. It all comes out at you, the way people live. And God did that for a reason. God did that for the reason of telling us we're going to be ourselves. We're going to make mistakes. We're going to do things that we may not even believe that we've done. I want to tell the story this morning, but I want to tell it, we're going to get into the biblical story, but I want to tell it in a little bit different way. There once was a man from Struthers who went to Chicago to stay the weekend with his sister. While he was there, he wanted to see the sights and eat the food in famous Chicago restaurants. But then that evening, this dumb Struther guy, he drove his car down into town and parked it and was walking through the neighborhood, and he encountered a gang of kids, and they beat him and they robbed him and they left him laying on the sidewalk. So along come a preacher, and he said, well, I'm dressed in my really nice clothes. I have a religious conference to go to. I don't have my cell phone with me, but by the time when I get there, I'll call someone to send them out to help him, because I don't want to get blood on my suit. Then came a Sunday school teacher, and he says, I don't know whether the people that beat him up are still watching, and they might beat me up, so I'm going to go ahead on my way. So he went on his way. And then there came another gentleman along, and he was a bar owner. He drank, he smoked, he didn't believe in God. He's an atheist. But he sees the man lying on the sidewalk bleeding. He's overcome with pity. He gets his car and gently places the man in the back seat, not worrying about getting blood on his clothes or blood on the clothing. He's just interested in getting the man as quickly as he could to the hospital. Then when he gets him to the hospital, he finds out he doesn't have any money. So he pays the ER bill. And then he tells the staff, if you need anything else, here's my cell phone number. Give me a call if he needs anything else, and I'll help. Now, which three of those was his neighbor? The bar owner. Yeah, the bar owner. That's the kind of story Jesus gives the lawyer or the teacher of the law in this story. Jesus is teaching the man that his neighbor was anyone that's in need. Now you might say, no one ever acts like that. No one would ever leave a person bleeding on the sidewalk and walk on by and not help them. Well, I found some stories. Back in 1985, Carolyn of Sarasota, Florida, was taking her 2 daughters to church on Sunday morning. And she was disgusted to find an unkept man sitting by one of the palm trees on the church property. He had his hat pulled down over his face. He had beer cans scattered all around him. Now, she wasn't the only one that was offended by the vagrant, but her indignation dissolved into tears when the bum walked up into the pulpit later that morning and gave the sermon. Here was their preacher, and he was trying to get across to them what was going on in the neighborhood surrounding the church. But no one stopped to help him. No one even invited him into the building. A 65-year-old man stepped on a manhole cover that tipped and caused him to fall into a 5-foot hole. He was trapped there for 45 minutes while people walked by and heard him screaming, but ignored his screams. Another story told of a man who was injured in a car accident on a busy freeway outside of Washington, D.C. 2 men stopped to help him, but they didn't have a cell phone. So they kept trying to flag someone down to use their phone. All they got was honks and gestures with their hands to them. And then the one guy even rolled down his window and screamed, "Why don't you take that crap off to the side of the road?" And then on a little lighter note, there was more of those stories, but I didn't want to tell any more. A Sunday school teacher was telling her class the story of the Good Samaritan, in which a man was beaten, robbed, and left for dead. She described his situation in vivid detail so the students would catch the drama. Then she asked the class, if you saw a person laying on the roadside, all wounded and bleeding, what would you do? There was a calm came over the class. And then one little girl bravely broke the hush in silence, and she said, I think I'd throw up. Now, most of us don't think about the story of the Good Samaritan that way about it. We don't think about the blood and the gore. All we think about is the man that's helping him mainly. We don't think about the guy that's in the ditch. Okay? But let's look at some background to this biblical story. The law of Moses commanded the Israelites to love their neighbor as theirself. And as all good legalists do, this lawyer wanted to know who his neighbor was so he could know who he had to love and who he didn't have to love. That's the way they looked at it when they were legally looking at it. That's what they wanted to do. He wanted Jesus to draw a circle and put all the people in it that he had to love, and anybody that wasn't in that circle, he didn't have to love them anymore. Only the ones that were in the circle. And we know from history of the Old Testament that we know that they interpreted a neighbor, a Jew, is what they interpreted as their neighbor. It had to be a Jew and it had to be someone nearby. And that's what they interpreted it as. And the occasion for telling the story took place evidently was near Jerusalem, possibly in Bethany at the house of Lazarus, is where he told the story. If you'd like to, turn your Bibles to Luke 10, 25 through 37. We're going to read it and then just talk about it a little bit here this morning. Of course, the title of it is The Parable of the Good Samaritan. And it's in Luke 10, 25 through 37. And behold, a certain lawyer stood up and tested him, saying, Teacher, what shall I do to inherit eternal life? Now, he's attempting to trap Jesus, but one thing I want to point out here is he knew there was something that had to be done for him to be saved. That's what he's questioning him on. And the men like these lawyers, they tended to reject people who were not as intelligent as they were, okay? And that they didn't feel that he was that intelligent, but he proved it. And as I mentioned, he wanted Jesus to draw that circle, is what he wanted him to do, draw it in the sand. But Jesus says to him, what is written in the law, and what is your reading of it? Now, Jesus was making sure that his understanding was the same as what the Word was saying. We have that same problem today with the Bible. Sometimes somebody interprets it differently than we do. But it's in black and white, and usually if you just read it in context and read it through, you'll find the truth and you'll find it's right there. Jesus was making sure that he understands. So he answered and said, the lawyer did, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, and with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself. This is a summary of the law that's found in Deuteronomy and Leviticus. It's a summary of what they were taught to do. So Jesus said to him, you have answered rightly, do this and you will live. And Jesus tells him what he must do. He's telling him flat out what you must do to be saved. But he's wanting to justify himself, so he says to Jesus, who is my neighbor? And let's face it, the lawyer knew who his neighbor was. He was only trying to get Jesus to say something that he could have called him on or made him look stupid on. But then Jesus goes into telling him the story. Then Jesus answered and said, a certain man went down from Jerusalem to Jericho and fell among thieves, who stripped him of his clothing, wounded him, and departed, leaving him half dead. We're not told the man's name. We're not told the man's race. The story, with all the background of the story, it's believed that he was a Jew. Okay? Jerusalem is 3,200 feet above Jericho, so the man was literally going down to Jericho. I mean, we say we're going downtown, but it might be on a level field, but this is actually, that's why the Bible actually told that. This country that he was going through was rugged, and it was a haven for people to rob you. And he was not only robbed, but he was beaten half to death. And the story goes on. Now by chance a certain priest came down that road, and when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. Likewise a Levite, when he arrived at the place, came and looked and passed by on the other side. That doesn't really happen today, does it? Who's the priest? The priest is supposed to be a godly man. The priest is supposed to be the most loving person. That's why he's been chosen to be a priest. And the Levite, he's a minister in the temple. So he's another God-fearing person, and he sees another human being laying on the side of the road, bleeding and almost to death, almost dying. And both of them, they don't just walk past him, they go on the other side of the street. Other side of the dirt path, they're over there, they're walking past and just kind of staring to make sure he doesn't get up and come after him or something. It happens. It's human nature sometimes. And as I mentioned, the priest was a law-abiding person, and so was the Levite. But a certain Samaritan, as he journeyed, came where he was, and when he saw him, this last part is exactly what happens. This is the whole story right here, really, when you come right down to it. He had compassion on the man. The Levite and the priest could have cared less, but he had compassion. Now, if this man was a Jew, what was the relationship between the Jews and the Samaritan? They hated each other. Out flat hated each other. They would go 50 miles out of their way just to not to have to cut through Samaria. They hated each other, and the story goes on. So he went to him and bandaged his wounds, pouring on oil and wine, and he set him on his own animal, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. On the next day when he departed, he took out 2 denarii, gave them to the innkeeper, and said to him, take care of him, and whatever more you spend, when I come again, I will repay you. And Jesus asked the same question that I asked at the beginning of my sermon. So which of these 3 do you think were neighbors of him who fell among thieves? And he said, he who showed mercy on him. And then Jesus' ultimate answer to him was, go and do likewise. Now the question we have to ask ourselves this morning, do we go and do likewise? Have you ever stopped and helped somebody that you didn't know? I know years ago it was a lot safer to do that. Now that I'm older, I don't do it because I'm older, but that's not an excuse either. When I was going to New Brighton, the church down there, we had a gas pump out behind the church. Well, the word got out among the people that the gas pump was there, so what we would do is we'd have people traveling through town and they would always be out of gas, they'd be poor and they didn't have any money, they'd have their kids with them and they would want gas. And 99% of the time, we gave it to them. A gentleman came to the church on Sunday morning and said that he was traveling from Kentucky to Indiana. Now, how he got to, why he came through New Brighton, I don't know, but that's the way he was going. So, he said that his car had gotten towed in Pittsburgh and it was in the impound lot. So, I was just young. Me and Mary was probably only married maybe 2-3 years at the most at that time. And I was a young Christian too. So, I'm thinking, now what? I'm sitting back and watching these men to see what is done. And Floyd Patton said to the gentleman, he said, you come in and sit in the services with us. And when we're done, he said, we'll try to take care of your dilemma. So, I don't know why he even chose me, but he asked me to ride along with him. So we piled him and his wife and the 2 kids in the back seat. And we got up front. One of the kids sat between us in the front. And we drove all the way to Pittsburgh to the well, you know what? I got to change the story. I'm not lying, but we had to wait till Monday. We told the guy we had to wait till Monday because the impound lot was closed on Sunday. So the man actually took him in until Monday morning. And then I met him and we went. We went up to the impound lot, and he paid for the car to come out of the impound lot, gave the guy enough money to fill his car up, and sent him on his way. Now, did he do right, or did we get hornswoggled? You understand what I'm trying to say? The thing is, every time we do something good, or we're about to do something good, we always question that. Are you going to do it, or are you going to question it? And I'm not saying that you shouldn't be wise and you shouldn't make sure that you're not being taken, because also God tells us in His Word, be good stewards of my money. He tells us that. But He also wants us to do something with His money. And He wants it to mainly be good. And He wants it to be done in such a way that we're going to contact people and bring them in. You know. And I've been on the other end of that. I've been on the receiving end of that. So I know what it feels like to be down and out and to have people help you. It doesn't feel very good at the time, but then in the back of your mind you're saying, I really do need this. I'm glad this person's here to do it. You know, when me and Mary, when my back went out on me and we lost our house and everything because I couldn't work, we were building a shower in our apartment in the school, and 2 brothers, the one brother, well, I've known him ever since they were little kids. They used to work on cars with the older one, but the younger one was in construction. He framed houses and everything. He came down and helped me build that shower, and every time I went to Lowe's to get the lumber, he paid. And when you stop and think about that kind of stuff, you know, and until you've been in that situation where you're down and you just don't know which way you're going to turn, that part of life teaches you a very important lesson. It's like the Samaritan. It's like the lesson that we hear from the Samaritan. He did what he had to do. He didn't care if that guy was a Jew. He didn't care if he was black. He didn't care if he was Indian. He didn't care. He stopped, picked him up, put him on his animal, and took him to the inn. And then he didn't even care about the money he spent, you know, because I will almost guarantee you that that man ended up getting back a lot more than he gave, because I'll guarantee you God probably made sure of it. And he does that today with us. He makes sure that we're taken care of. It doesn't seem that way sometimes with the way the nation's going as far as our religious beliefs and all that's concerned. But one thing I learned yesterday was that in our prayers, what we need to be praying is, pray to God that the innocent will not have to suffer with the wrongdoers. Because we know plenty of times the Israelites were punished. They were in slavery for 450 years, punished by God because they weren't following Him. But not every one of those 450 slaves weren't following God. Not every one of them. But God wants us all to follow Him. And the eternity is hell, so why wouldn't you want to follow God to make sure that you're going to make it to heaven? What I want you to think about this week is, I want you to think about helping people. And another thing the man said at the seminar that really stuck with me too, and this is going to stick with me the rest of my life. He said, God is not counting the number of people that you've converted. He's counting the number of people that you mentioned Him to. That's what He's counting. Because the Bible tells us that we can plant, you can water, but who's going to give the increase? God. And that's what we have to do. We have to make sure that we're mentioning Jesus to someone. We have cards back there that I had made up that when you go to a restaurant and eat, leave it with the tip. You don't even have to mention a word to them. Or we have the tickets. I have tickets for the Vimeo deal. I have tickets I'll give you. They have the church's name on the back. Just leave them at the table. You don't even have to speak a word. Just leave them at the table. Because God's ultimate command, Jesus' ultimate command to us when He left this earth was, tell people about me. Tell people my gospel. Make sure you do that. So I want you to pray about it this week, and I want you to try to concentrate on doing something that you're actually speaking to someone about God. He doesn't expect you to be a Paul. He doesn't expect you to sell everything you own and go out and that's all you do. He doesn't expect that. I don't think He does. But He does expect us to do what we can do. And that's what we're going to be judged on. If we don't do what we can do, then we're going to be judged on that lack of doing nothing, is what I'm trying to say. And as I'm preaching this, I'm just as guilty as everybody else, because I have those cards in my pocket, and lots of times I'll forget to drop them. You know what I mean? But I'm starting to get better at it. I'm starting to speak to people more about it. And as a preacher, I should have been doing it long ago. But as I mentioned, I don't think we do as much for God as we can. You know, and sometimes and another problem that we have is sometimes we're like the priest and the Levite. Sometimes we're just too busy to worry about that stuff. And what we want is we want 50 new people to come here at one time. It's not the way it works. God says He'll give the increase, but He doesn't say when. We had a bus ministry in New Brighton, and out of that bus ministry, all those kids, we probably had maybe 5 or 6 ministers and youth group leaders that came out of that bus ministry. Waste of money? It was a money pit. And I'm not, it was a money pit. There was a lot of money spent. And not a lot of money came back in because the kids, their parents weren't coming, But the idea is, do what you can do and let God do it with, do with it what He likes, what He wants, what He's going to. His will is going to be done no matter what, no matter who does it. I've lectured you enough this morning. I'm lecturing myself too, though, because we have to get the word out there somehow, is what we have to do. And the lesson is yours. And if you have a need this morning to be baptized, we could do that for you. Or if you have a need to come back to the Lord, if you've been baptized and you need to come back for prayers, we can pray with you also this morning. Come as we stand and sing.
There's a fountain free is for you and me. Let us haste to its brink. There's a fountain from the source above, and He is all free drink. Will you come to the fountain free? Will you come? 'Tis for you and me, thirsty soul. Hear the welcome call. 'Tis the fountain open for all. There's a living stream with a crystal gleam from the throne of life. Now it flows while the waters roll. Let the weary soul hear the call that pours freely knows. Will you come to the fountain free? Will you come? 'Tis for you and me, thirsty soul. Hear the welcome call. 'Tis the fountain open for all. There's a rock that's flat and a soul is left that may not endure water share. 'Tis for you and me, and its stream I see. Let us hasten joyfully there. Will you come to the fountain free? Will you come? 'Tis for you and me, thirsty soul. Hear the welcome call. 'Tis the fountain open for all. Please be seated. Number 364.